Well, we are, as we proceed and move forward in the worship, we have a special worship team that we've assembled for today's Mother's Day. And so won't you pray for us and pray with us and join your voices and sing with us as we give praise to God. And so, brothers, if you all will come forward.
Awesome in power, our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. Lord, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power, our God, our God. my God. Oh, see how great is our God. God provides, so why do I worry about my life? When you come to my rescue 1,000 times, every other word it is a lie. God provides, God provides in ways I can't explain and can't deny. The little that I have He multiplies. Just when I feel He won't show up on time, God provides. He'll come through when the clouds of doubt rain down on you, and everything you thought you knew. Now finally you'll see what God can do for you. So tonight, close your eyes, there's no more need to fight. Watch God provide. God provides. It's hard to say when there's no food to eat, or what you see is all that life will be. And will this be another year of misery for me? But my faith can't survive on things that I see, and my feelings can't control my destiny. See, God, I only want what you believe for me. So tonight, close your eyes, there's no more need to fight. Watch God provide. He will provide. Just wait and see. Oh yes, He will. Close your eyes, there's no more need to fight. Ooh. Watch God provide. Can I get a witness in here? All you gotta do is step out and wait on Him. He will provide. God will provide. Oh, I'm a witness today. My God will make a way out of no way. Turn to midnight in today. So tonight, close your eyes, there's no more need to fight. Watch God provide.
Will you turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Exodus, chapter 1. We will begin at verse number 15. For just a moment, my brothers and sisters, I want to talk about being mothers to God's kingdom. Being mothers to God's kingdom. So, my brothers and sisters, allow me to begin this message by stating that Mother's Day is a day of usually unsung heroes. It is a day that we remember and celebrate things that most often throughout the year go forgotten. While it is the birth mother that we most commonly remember and celebrate on this day, mothers come to us in a variety of shapes and forms. We have some of them are formal relationships, grandmothers, godmothers, aunts, other family members who take on mothering roles. Some of them are informal. People in the community, people in the church family, people in schools, or maybe even workplaces who, by virtue of the quality of relationship, take on attributes that we generally assign to mothers. All of those unsung efforts we celebrate on days like today. The interesting thing, my brothers and sisters, about life in America is that while we celebrate mothers on Mother's Day, and even at various times throughout the year, we celebrate anecdotally the work that mothers do. We don't quite have the same regard for it as it relates to our government policies. Our policies do not claim to, they do not support the words that we say and the praises that we shower on mothers. It's almost as if the words of Scripture are true as it relates to our civic life, that we praise mothers with our mouths, but our laws are far from it. Just in case you're having problems believing me, let me just share a couple of reasons why I think that's the case. In order to qualify for Social Security, you have to put in a certain number of work credits. You have to work a certain number of years in order to qualify for Social Security. However, caretaking is not considered work. Neither the raising a family nor the caretaking of older adults is considered work. Now, if you opened up a daycare center and took care of somebody else's kids, they would consider that work. If you worked in a nursing facility and took care of somebody else's family members, that was considered work. But if you do it in your own home, that's not considered work. That doesn't count towards the work qualifications for Social Security. It's a simple change in the law that could make that happen, but we celebrate mothers, but we don't want to have our laws to, it's like there was, when I worked in St. Louis, there was a guy who wanted to run for mayor, and everybody, all the preachers would gather together and they'd say, "You're going to be the next mayor, you're going to be the next mayor." And when it was time to run, he never did. And so we were at a baseball game one day and I said, "Man, why didn't you run? You had all of the preachers in town were supporting you." He said, "Yeah, they all patted me on the back, but nobody put $1 in the campaign." And so everybody said, go get him, but nobody wanted to support me going to get him. That's the way we treat mothers in our federal policy. We pat them on the back and say, "Yes, congratulations, be a good mother, you've done a great job," but we don't create policies that help support the work of mothers. The healthcare, the American Health Care Act that is trying to be passed right now, that has more pre-existing conditions. The list of pre-existing conditions is longer than the preamble to the Constitution. It impacts mothers greater then it impacts. And then, my brothers and sisters, it's just so funny and ironic to me. This is where the scripture really meets real life, is that people in Congress will pass a law and vote on a law, but exempt themselves from the law. They are paid with taxpayer money, mind you. They aren't raising independent money for their own salaries. Their salaries are paid for by you and I. And so they will pass a health care bill that will apply to you and I, but exempt themselves from it. Their health care bill won't change. Their health care policies won't change. They have a better health care system than we have, but they will force an inferior health care system on us, my brothers and sisters. And this is what happens in empire. This is how empire comes to existence and grows, is that it forces others into decisions that it exempts itself from. You have to wrestle with hard choices, but we will exempt ourselves from having to wrestle with these choices. And this is what's happening here in this text in the book of Exodus, as Pharaoh comes to power and sees a potential political threat among the people that he exacerbates by telling lies about the people. And then he begins to create policies to oppress the people. And one of these policies directly impacts the mothers in the text. The midwives are called in and told to kill all of the boy babies before they are born, in order that the people might not grow and flourish, my brothers and sisters. And what happens is the midwives in this text, who are not, at the time of the action of the text, are not mothers themselves, form a community with the mothers to protect them from the unjust laws of Pharaoh. And this is the first point I want to bring out of this, my brothers and sisters, is that as much as the American imagination would like to portend and create this image of a mother doing this work in solitude by herself, able to do all of the things that mothers need to do as a type of superwoman, that mothers, like everybody else, need community. That we cannot do this work by ourselves, nor did God create us to do work by ourselves. That God did not create us to be isolated or in our own individual silos. That God did not create us to be in these tight-knit nuclear families that have no connection one to another. But God created us to be in community with and for one another. I witnessed this in my own life, that my mother was both on the giving and receiving end of this. That every summer, that I had two nephews that would come from Mississippi, and they would spend 2 weeks with us here in Cincinnati in order to give their parents a break for those 2 weeks. And so my mother took on the responsibility of 2 extra kids in order to give my older brother and his wife a break for those weeks. And then I would be sent to family members for a couple of weeks throughout the summer, here and there, in order to give my mother a break. And so that that she and my father could spend time reconnecting with each other and doing the things that they needed to do. They existed and operated in community, my brothers and sisters. My uncles tell stories of being sent to family members for an entire summer in order to provide a little economic relief for their mother and their father, who were often had struggling to be able to feed the entire family. That we operate and exist in community, my brothers and sisters, and the myth of the supermother that is able to do everything by themselves, what it does is it creates this false expectation that if you are a real woman or a real mother, you can do all of this by yourself and you don't need any help. And when inevitably you fall short of that unrealistic expectation, then you begin to feel as if you do not measure up. Or we begin to cast disparaging remarks in society as if to say that you're not living up to this false standard, my brothers and sisters. And the standard is not, it is not a biblical standard for sure, and I believe it's not a godly standard because God designed us to be in community. The reason why it's important that we gather together as a body in church, it is not because you can only find God here. Because you can find God at home. You can find God in the park. You can find God in the encounter with others. You don't come here to find God, but we come here to be connected to one another because God calls us and designs for us to be in community together. But the empire, the powers that seek to oppress us, designed to separate us, to keep us apart. Because the empire knows that we are stronger together and that we are weaker apart. So God created this community between the midwives and the mothers where they conspired together to protect the mothers, to keep them safe. The second part of the text that I want to lift up, my brothers and sisters, is that in this community that was built, the midwives and the mothers, they recognized that allegiance to God and faithfulness to God and allegiance to the empire were not the same thing. That faithfulness to God and allegiance to the empire were not the same thing. Pharaoh gave the midwives a direct order. And the Bible says that the midwives, because they feared God, would not comply with the order. And not only did they not comply with the order, but they didn't feel the need to trumpet their disobedience in Pharaoh's face. So they didn't have a march or rally and say, no, we're not going to do this with Pharaoh. They didn't boycott Pharaoh. They very quietly and very secretly went about the business of actively disobeying Pharaoh. Because they knew that the protection of their community was a sacred act. And even if that meant violating Pharaoh's law, and not only violating Pharaoh's law, but lying to Pharaoh about why they violate the law. If you look at the text, Pharaoh brings them back in because he sees his law is not being followed. There's still baby boys born everywhere. So he brings back in the midwives and say, hey, didn't I give you an order to execute all the baby boys? And what do the midwives do? The midwives, they turn and lie to Pharaoh. And not only do they lie to Pharaoh, but they lie to Pharaoh in the way that Pharaoh lied to the people. They turn Pharaoh's lie back on him, right? Because if you look at the earlier text, you see Pharaoh tells this lie about the Hebrews. They are this dangerous other that's a part of this Egyptian community. They are, we gotta be careful about them. We don't know about them. They are dangerous. And so we've got to change the way our society is ordered to protect us from these dangerous people. And so what do the midwives do? They play right into Pharaoh's lie. Why aren't you killing these baby boys before they're born. These Hebrew women, they're not like the Egyptian women. They're stronger. Before we get there, the babies are born. We hear that they're in delivery, and we're rushing on our way, and before we get there, the baby's already there. There's nothing we can do. We can't. They manufacture this lie to Pharaoh for the protection of the community. And this is a really, really sticky point for me, especially now, because it seemed like for a minute in American life, it seemed like for a minute we were heading in the right direction. It seemed like the best of science and social science was impacting federal policies. The federal government was backing away from mass incarceration efforts. They were backing away from prosecuting drug offenses to the highest, and it seemed like we were moving in a good direction from a federal perspective. And then Jeff Sessions got appointed as Attorney General from the president that our country elected, and it was confirmed by the Senate. And Jeff Sessions, who Coretta King said was a racist, he was named Attorney General. And just this week, in the midst of all of the President Trump and former FBI Director Comey hoopla, Jeff Sessions made an announcement that they are reversing all of the decisions around drug sentencing, and now they are going to pursue maximum sentencing for all drug-related felonies through the federal government. They are going to double down on mass incarceration. Our policies, the policies of the government that we are living in, are not, they're not designed to keep us safe. They're not designed to protect us. They are designed to exploit us for the sake of the transference of power and wealth from our hands into their hands. That's what mass incarceration is. This is not about, it's certainly not about rehabilitation, and it's not even really about punishment. It's about free labor within the prisons, because prison is the only place where slavery is still legal in America. And so we are increasing now a prison population that is able to do free labor. But then they've gotten really smart about this, and they said not only are we benefiting from the labor that's happening within the prison, but now we're going to actually privatize prisons so that business owners can create their own prison and then charge the government, charge taxpayers for the number of people that are housed in the prison. And then there's no oversight as to what happens in the prison. So what do? They cut costs, right? They get substandard and low quality food for the people in there. They take rooms that were created for 2 or 3 people and put 5 or 6 people who aren't getting arrested. They sue the state for more money. And so what do states do? They find ways to arrest more people. It is a power and profit system, my brothers and sisters. And we've got to find ways to interrupt the system. And while it's important, to teach our young people to follow the law, right? And so all the young people, I need all of my young people, I need you to look at me for 1 second. Look at me for 1 second, all of them. I want you to hear your pastor say this. All right, Pastor Nelson is saying, follow the law. All right? Especially because it is much harder for those of us who have the fortunate privilege of being kissed by God's Son with this beautiful, beautiful melanin skin.
Come on, talk about it now.
It is harder for us to navigate the legal system than it is for others. So follow the law. And at the same time, we've got to understand that the laws aren't necessarily designed for our benefit. And so we need to be able to figure out, how do we creatively circumvent the law for our own protection? How do we create communities that are safer without having to turn to the police every time? Because you might be fortunate and you might get an Officer Hicks, you might get Batman coming to your house, somebody who cares about people and has an idea of what God is trying to do within the system. But everybody in the system doesn't have his heart. And the system isn't designed to look for people with his heart. And so we've got to figure out creative ways to circumvent the system. We've got to figure out creative ways to be able to protect one another and protect God's people and protect the people who are on the outside, who are the most marginalized. The reason that Pharaoh can impose this order on the Hebrews is because he knows that the Egyptians won't riot about what's happening to the Hebrew mothers. And we've got to find ways, my brothers and sisters, to protect those who don't have the protection of society. Those who don't have the money and the power and the privilege to be able to stand up and defend themselves and fight for themselves. Those who are the most vulnerable in our society, we've got to figure out how we can protect them. The last point I want to make, my brothers and sisters, is that the Bible says God looks at what the midwives have done. And God is pleased with it, and God blesses them. And God blesses them with families. And so I just want to pause for a moment to give just context of why this is important. In biblical times, nature had the upper hand on human life. So floods, pestilence, plagues, just low successful childbirth, all of those things could wipe out an entire nation before they had a chance to really grow and be strong. In addition to that, wars and raiders and all of these things made it hard. So if you were born, it was a miracle. If you made it to adulthood, that was a second miracle. If you made it to old age, that was just it was just a tremendous blessing, because that did not happen often. Infant and childhood death rates were astronomical. People did not live. And so it was necessary in order to ensure the survival of a people, let alone the human race, that people have children. And so having children was a kind of an ethical requirement. They had to. You needed to in order to preserve the... we're not in that day right now. The advancements in science and technology have given us an upper hand in large ways from nature. We have floods that come, and while there are people who are impacted, they don't impact us on a large scale as they have. We have not had a natural disaster in any of our lifetime that has threatened humanity. In fact, we have more people on the planet right now than the natural resources of the earth alone can accommodate. And so if we did not have scientific abilities to enhance natural resources, we wouldn't be able to feed anybody just on the natural resources of the planet alone. And especially here in America, our standard of living is so high that the world could not survive on our standard of living if everybody in the world lived at the standard of living that Canada has, which is less than ours. It would take 5 times the resources we have for everybody to live at Canada's resources, which causes us we have to think about how do we learn to live with less in order to make room so that other people can have more. These are ethical questions that we have to raise. So what I'm saying, my brothers and sisters, is we aren't facing the type of time or trouble that people in the Bible were. So when we see things like God bless them with families, when we see the privileging and prioritization of families and people with children in the Bible, it isn't because having children is more holy than not having children. It is because of survival being a moral and ethical necessity. That being said, my brothers and sisters, I just want to lift that up because there are so many among us that are childless, that either are not able to or because of decisions have chosen not to have children. And we just need to share that context so that we aren't unintentionally making them feel like they are somehow less worthy or less human, or somehow God is mad at them or punishing them or choosing not to bless them because they are without children. That this is not a statement about blessing from God or not blessing from God, but this is an understanding of how you're positioned in the society around you. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That being said, God honors them with this blessing in the context of their society, and now they who have been part of the community to protect mothers, are now mothers themselves. God blesses and sees that, my brothers and sisters. But not only that, while the Bible does not say this explicitly, if you read the text, what implicitly happens is that God begins this movement to bring the people out of Egypt. God begins the birth of God's kingdom, God's community, right here in the resistance movement of Egypt. And God begins this by following the example that the midwives set. It's as if, my brothers and sisters, the midwives have drawn a blueprint, and God takes the blueprint and blows it up to massive scale and uses a whole campaign to get Israel out of Egypt based on the blueprint that the midwives have created. And it starts with there's a child that's born. The law is changed that children are to be born in the river. The mother of the child knows the law, but she doesn't obey the law. She creatively disobeys the law and puts the child in the river, yes, but puts him in a basket so he floats in the river, puts the child in the basket in a place where the princess, the Pharaoh's daughter, would be bathing. So that she would find the child. She adopts the child. So the child that was supposed to die by Pharaoh's order now is raised in Pharaoh's house, being nurtured by Pharaoh's resources, so that Pharaoh, who created a law to kill the child, is now providing in his own home the resources to raise a child that he was supposed to try to kill. My brothers and sisters, and not only that, he provides the resources to raise the child who's going to lead the movement to undo Pharaoh's oppression. My brothers and sisters, God follows the path of the midwives and births in the seat of Pharaoh's power, the resistance to the empire. And then once Moses accepts God's call to the empire, what does Moses do? Moses comes back And like the midwives, Moses tells Pharaoh this grand tale to set up God's deliverance. Pharaoh, we've got to get out of Egypt. We need to go into the wilderness to worship our God because we worship in a way that you all don't necessarily agree with. And we don't want to offend you with our worship. And so we need to get out of here. We need to go a ways away. We need 3 days to get far enough out of Egypt so that when we worship, we don't offend you with our worship. And then once our worship is over, we'll come back, is the implication of the text. And then what happens? They go out into the wilderness after God works to deliver them out. They get out into the wilderness, but they don't worship, they run. Or maybe their running was an act of worship, but they run from Pharaoh, and God uses the same path that the midwives, the blueprint that they created, God uses that blueprint to get the people out. My brothers and sisters, what I'm simply trying to say is that in the midst of a government that is seemingly oppressing people all around the country, we're spending twice as much to bomb one country one time as it would take to fix the water of a city that the people intentionally, that the government intentionally switched. They corrupted the water, but they won't fix the water, but they'll spend the money to bomb somebody else half the world away. In the midst of a government that is oppressing people at home and abroad, we can pray for God to change the world. We can pray for God's kingdom to come and will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We can pray that God would do something to fix the situation that we're in. But while we are praying, we ought to be finding ways to creatively resist, my brothers and sisters, because while we're waiting on God, I just have the sneaky suspicion that God is waiting on us.
Well,
that God is looking for some midwives who will be creative in their resistance. That God is looking for some midwives who will build community with oppressed people and help to create communities where people can be safe. That God is looking for some midwives to do this work so that God can take the effort and bless it and multiply it for the deliverance of the people. And I believe that today God is calling us to be midwives. Part of the inequity that we've created in our society is that we are okay throwing out masculine images that we expect to be universal, everybody to appeal to or want to be like or emulate in some way, but we're not necessarily comfortable in the same way with feminine images being that same way. So we don't necessarily want to think of all of us as mothers. We don't necessarily want to think of all of ourselves as midwives, because that kind of challenges my machismo, my macho-ness. I'm too much of a man to be somebody's midwife. I would just say from a biblical perspective that the church is the bride of Christ.
all right.
God is calling us to be midwives to the work that God is doing in the world, to create community, to find ways to creatively resist so that God can bless that work. Because there's a Moses being born in our community right now. And we need to protect him, because the empire won't. He might have a pre-existing condition and won't qualify for health care.
Wow.
He might be born in a district that has a failing school and be the recipient of a substandard education. He might grow up on a block where the culture of the people, the culture of the relationship between the police and the people who live there is unhealthy and predatory. And he might be stopped and frisked on his way to school, have to walk through metal detectors. And somebody's got to be able to create a community to say to this young man, to this young woman, to this young boy, to this young girl, that God has a calling for you that's much greater than your surroundings. That God has a calling for you that's much greater than what the empire is doing to you. So can we be midwives to the movement? We have a practice here at Beloved Community Church, my brothers and sisters, that we believe that God doesn't just speak through me, because I'm the one up front with the collar and the microphone, but that God desires to speak to and through each and every one of us. And so we take a moment as a part of the worship to share with one another, what is God saying to you right now? And so if you would, just turn to a friend or a neighbor and share with them what God is sharing with you in this moment.